I accused my own husband. Not to the police, not to his face. I walked into a school, sat across from a woman I barely knew, and I told her Marcus was hurting our son. And I meant every word. What I didn't tell her was the part I still can't say out loud. My name is Delia. My son's name is Theo. He was 8 years old that winter, and he had started going quiet in a way that wasn't normal quiet. Not the kind of quiet where a kid is tired or bored or watching something on a screen. This was the kind of quiet where he'd answer a question and then immediately look somewhere else, like he was checking to see if the answer was okay before he'd let himself believe it was. I noticed it first on a Tuesday. We were in the kitchen. I'd made eggs the way he liked them, with the cheese melted all the way through, and he sat down and looked at the plate and said, "Thanks, Mom," and then just waited, sat with his hands in his lap and waited. I asked him if something was wrong, and he said no. But he didn't pick up his fork until I sat down across from him, like he needed a witness. Marcus, my husband, he wasn't a violent man. I want to be clear about that because it matters to what I'm about to tell you. He didn't hit. He didn't rage. What he did was quieter than that, and in some ways I think that made it harder to name. He had a way of asking Theo questions that weren't really questions. "You don't really think that, do you?" That one. "What made you think that was a good idea?" That one. Said in a voice that was calm, patient even. But the temperature in the room would drop every single time. Theo had started coming home from school with his backpack already unzipped. I only noticed because one day his water bottle fell out in the driveway, and when I pointed it out, he looked at me like he was bracing himself. 8 years old, bracing for a reaction to a spilled water bottle. I'd talked to Marcus about it, twice. Both times he told me I was overreading, that I was anxious by nature, and I was projecting that onto Theo, and both times I walked away wondering if he was right. That's the thing about living with someone who's very certain. You start to borrow their certainty about yourself. His teacher that year was a woman named Claire. Calm, mid-40s, the kind of person who remembered which kid liked which color marker. Theo talked about her the way kids talk about people who make them feel safe. He'd say, "Ms. Claire said," before telling me something, like her name was a permission slip. I'd been in to see her twice already that year, once for a reading assessment, once for a routine check-in. She'd mentioned both times that Theo was a careful kid. "He thinks before he answers," she said. She meant it as a compliment. I knew it wasn't. The morning I went in, it was a Thursday. School had been out for a half day the day before, and Marcus had been home with Theo. When I picked him up that afternoon, Theo got in the car and buckled his seatbelt without saying anything. I asked how his day was. He said, "Okay." I asked what they did. He said, "Stuff." And then he turned and looked out the window the entire drive home, and when we got inside, he went straight to his room and shut the door. Gently. The way you shut a door when you're trying not to be noticed shutting it. I sat in the kitchen for a long time that night. Marcus was in the living room. The TV was on. I could hear him laughing at something. I didn't sleep. I lay there and I went through every version of what I knew and what I suspected and what I could prove, and none of it was a bruise. None of it was a mark I could photograph. It was the water bottle in the driveway. It was the fork he didn't pick up. It was the way he said, "Okay," with his whole body tightened around the word. The next morning, I dropped Theo at school, and I asked to speak with Ms. Claire. She brought me into that small room off the front office, the one with the round table and the 2 chairs that are sized for parents but still feel a little small. And she sat across from me, and she folded her hands the same way I had folded mine, and she looked at me and said, "What's going on, Delia?" And I told her. I believed my son was being emotionally harmed at home. I told her it was my husband. I used the word abuse. I said it clearly. I'd rehearsed saying it clearly because I knew if I hedged it, she would hedge it too, and Theo didn't have room for hedging. She asked me if I was safe. I said yes. She asked if Theo had said anything specific. I said no. She asked if I had witnessed anything I could describe, and I told her about the fork, about the door, about the questions that weren't questions. She wrote things down. She told me that as a mandated reporter, she had an obligation to pass this along. She said it gently. She said she'd need to document what I'd shared. And then she looked at me and said, "Delia, is there anything you haven't told me?" And there it was. Because here's what I hadn't told her. Marcus and I had been in couples counseling for 7 months. Our therapist, a man named Dr. Paul, had told us 3 weeks earlier that he believed the source of tension in our home was mutual. That we both contributed to an environment of walking on eggshells. That I specifically had a pattern of withdrawing and then overcorrecting. He'd used the phrase, anxiety-driven control, in a way that was pointed at me. I had not told Ms. Claire that the week before I went to see her, Marcus had asked me for a separation. That I had said no. That the therapist's last note had described Marcus as emotionally withholding, but had also described me as prone to narrative escalation under stress. I had not told her any of that. What I told her was true. What I believed about Theo was real. The fork, the door, the quiet, all of it was real. But I sat in that chair and I let her write down what I'd said without giving her the context that would have made her question my motive. And she was a mandated reporter, which means the moment I walked out of that office, something was set in motion that I couldn't take back. A caseworker came to our home 11 days later. Marcus opened the door. I watched from the kitchen. Theo was at school. I don't know, even now, whether I did it for Theo or for myself. Maybe both. Maybe neither is the whole truth. That's the part I carry. That's the part that doesn't have a clean answer, no matter how many times I turn it over. Theo is 11 now. He laughs more than he used to. He picks up his fork before I sit down. I think about that sometimes, whether that means I was right, or whether it just means things changed the way things change, and I gave myself the credit. Marcus and I are not together. I don't know what he tells people about why. I've never asked Theo what he remembers about that year. I'm not sure I'm allowed to. I'm not sure it would be for him. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments.